So I'd like to invite now Professor Mohanbir Sawhney. You're someone who I've been following for a long time in your marketing work, and it's just a sheer pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Yeah, you got to be careful what I do with those paper napkins. You know, they come back to bite you. You actually have to then deliver and execute, which is something academics never do. So we leave it to other people. And in that spirit, I'm just going to set out some sparks and leave it to you guys to execute. You know, that's what we do best. We advise. It was interesting, actually. Neera's comments were a perfect segue to what I want to talk about. And she mentioned something about when you look around, and this is a microcosm of the diaspora worldwide, you see leaderships in multiple facets of life. And you know, whether it's the arts, or whether it is science, or whether it is politics, or whether it is entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth, or whether it's philanthropy, charitable causes. So when you start to think about impact, you know, how do you start to even define that? How do you start to define it, in a way that goes beyond superficialities? You know, we can always count up the number of CEOs and so on and so forth, and we keep saying the same things. 7% of this, 3% of that, that's okay, but it's got to add up to something. So that's one mission that I put forth. The other thing is it's got to be inclusive, the definition of impact. By the way, I actually looked up global impact of Indian diaspora, and the government of India obviously has a point of view on it, and that point of view is one number, $78 billion. Aur paisa bhejo. Their definition of contribution of Indian diaspora is literally the contribution in terms of remittances. Thank you very much. But that is a limiting view. We have to take a more inclusive view because we contribute in so many ways. And there were some very interesting remarks this morning about, is it about extraction, or is it about giving? Is it about doing, or is it about showing up? So hopefully some of the ideas I want to share with you are the beginnings of a framework that starts to put these ideas together. Because that's what we do. I mean, at least what I do for a living is, you know, bring some structure to messy problems, right? And this is very much TIP, thoughts in progress. There's no conclusion here. It's still at the paper napkin now. It's just PowerPoint napkin now, you know? So if we can move this forward, yeah. So I sort of say, anecdotally, we rock. You know, we can go around and tout numbers, whether it's 12 or 50 or 60, I don't know how many Fortune 500 CEOs we have, and so on and so forth. We look at doctors, we look at scientists, we look at academics, we look at, you know, entrepreneurship. We hear numbers about how many Silicon Valley firms have tech co-founders from India, academics, political leaders, 1% in Congress, I think, and philanthropic giving. All these are great, and all these are, but they're anecdotal. What we need to do is to go a little bit beyond that, a little bit more deep and a more sort of conceptually rigorous definition of global impact, right? So when we say impact, by the way, impact is a lousy word. It actually means hitting something. Just reflect on that, you know. So I think probably contribution might be a better word, but anyway, we'll call it impact for now. Impact is actually what Newton said happens when one object hits another. So the question when we look at impact, three questions I asked myself were, who are we impacting? Right? Who are the audiences? And I teach marketing, so, you know, so the first question I ask is, who is the customer? You know, who are the audiences? Because if you look at the Indian population, India as a country, their definition of impact is very different. As I said, it is how much money can you send us, how many, you know, how much reverse brain drain can happen, how many cross-border projects can you support, how can you support the well-being of India. When you look at the United States, it's a very different perspective, right? They look at, like, how can you create wealth here, create jobs, create, you know, improve civic engagement and so on. So we have to think about who are we impacting. The other thing is towards what end, right? Towards what? As I said, we contribute in different ways. I have met some fascinating people yesterday and today people who are contributing by creating artistic endeavors, people who are creating, who are doing phenomenal philanthropic contributions, and then people who are doing the nuts and bolts of building companies, leading large organizations. So is the end spiritual? Is the end economic? Is the end civic? Is the end artistic? What are the endeavors? And third, what are the metrics? We got to be able to measure. So as a sort of as an academic, I started to put these ideas together and then ask myself, how do we actually start to think about this impact? So then sort of you start to brainstorm, what are the dimensions, right? And what are the potential ways in which we can measure it? Is it how many jobs we've created? Is it how much wealth has been created? Is it how much foreign direct investment has been created by the diaspora? Is it the number of leaders that we have in Fortune 500 companies or in civic organizations? Is it the number of patents? Is it the number of scientific publications and academic thought leadership? Number of deans of universities and presidents? How many movies have we made? How many books have we written? How many singles have hit the Billboard 100 and so on? And what have we contributed? These are all good ideas, but we need some way to bring all of this together under one roof. And this is where my logic of segmentation starts to really kind of bother me. Is like, well, there's so many segments. You got to unify them, but still be inclusive. So here's my thought towards the measurement framework. I drew inspiration from the idea of the balanced scorecard, because the balanced scorecard was a framework that said you got to look at different facets: the customer dimension, the process dimension, the financial dimension. So we want to look at multiple facets. That's one thing that's very, very important. But the other thing is that in terms of metrics for those dimensions, let's take inspiration from GDP, right? Which is the gross domestic product, which is a measure in some sense of the overall contribution of an economy. So I'm proposing a notion. By the way, one thing that you learn in academia is when you write and you want people to read stuff that you write, you got to have buzzwords, and you got to have acronyms, right? And you got to have something that people can hang their hats and turbans on and remember. So I'm going to propose a concept of the global diaspora impact, and I'm going to call this GDIP, right? So it's the global diasporic impact. And let me actually define this as the global diasporic product, which is an extension of the GDP idea, as the total value of the economic, philanthropic, intellectual, and civic impact of the global Indian diaspora on people, organizations, economies, and governments worldwide. This is as close to a precise definition as I could get. So this is really trying to bring multiple facets together. And now the problem is that the yardsticks are different. Not everything is measurable in dollars, right? Philanthropic impact might be in terms of lives impacted. So I'll get to metrics in a minute. But at least, the idea here is that we will create a perspective on the all-encompassing contributions that are by the way, this is not just that I is not Indian. This is global diasporic product of any diaspora. But since we are the best, let's start with us. So we can take that little I in there as Indian, or whatever you want to call it, right? So let's get specific. And more than getting specific, let's get epic, right? So these are what I mean by epic here is 4 pillars. By the way, these 4 pillars actually, Sanjeev, were very easy for me to do. I just took the pillars of Indiaspora. You talk about philanthropy, you talk about entrepreneurship, right? You talk about sort of, bringing academia and so on. So I just put those things together, rearranged them, and essentially these are the 4 pillars: economic, which is the value of earning; philanthropic, which is the value of giving, intellectual, which is the value of learning, and civic, which is the value of governing. So these are the 4 pillars on which this gross diasporic product can be sort of dimensionalized in. And economic, by the way, is, I could have said E stands for entrepreneurship, but it's not just that. I mean, if you're, this is actually all corporate organizations that are for profit, right? For profit. So there you would be measured in terms of stakeholder value, in terms of, you know, job creation, and also potentially remittances and so on, all of the economic indicators. The next pillar is philanthropic, and that is really on giving back, right? So it's that two-pocket idea is probably still there. My apologies that, you know, you can't give what you don't have. So first you got to make, then you got to give. So those are sort of, in some sense, those first 2 pillars are related, right? But the contributions will be measured differently there. It's in terms of the scale and the number of lives and the number of people and the quality of life that you impact. And by the way, this is where we can draw some inspiration from the Gates Foundation, which was the first organization to say, let's measure philanthropy, right? In terms of ROI and, you know, how, and particularly their vaccine research, malaria and whatever. The third is intellectual, right? And so in intellectual, it's everything that we do to create intellectual capital. Knowledge, science, patents, publications, and yes, the creative arts, right? So any form of intangible capital that is created is a part of the third. And the fourth, which is becoming more important, and I think where we need to, this is about showing up, right, in our communities, is the value that we add in governance to the communities that we live in, we engage in, and also, yes, our contribution back to governance in India. And as you know, as we were pointing out, there are some challenges lately. So, so when we put this together, now the next sort of idea is, how do we define them and what are some possible metrics? Again, I've tried to take this to the level of precision that I could, but it's still very, very early thinking. So from an economic capital standpoint, you know, it's the gross economic value created by diaspora in terms of jobs and wealth creation. And possible metrics here can be the wealth that you create, which is personal capital, jobs that you create, human capital, entity value that you create, shareholder capital, and, you know, and one measure could be like how many CEOs, how many business leaders, and so on that we have. By the way, MR and Sanjeev, in case you haven't figured out, this is your homework assignment. I'm just giving you the question paper. I don't have the answers. So this is, we'll talk about how we go further on this, right? In terms of philanthropic capital, it's really the idea of gross well-being, right? The gross well-being that you create by creating and leading and giving to nonprofit organizations. And here, the things you would look at is the lives that you impact, the dollars that you contribute, and the number of people in leadership positions in nonprofit and charitable organizations. Intellectual capital is the gross value of intellectual assets that you create to academic and artistic endeavors, as well as leadership of these organizations. Right? So here we might look at actually fairly concrete criteria like patents, scientific publications, number of leading academicians, either in administrative positions or in, you know, scientific positions, and the volume of art, entertainment, media, film created. And then finally, civic capital. This is civic capital. I wrote actually a paper on this on public sector innovation. Public sector innovation is measured in terms of what we call public value. And public value is the well-being of citizenry and the improvement of the quality of life. So it's really the gross public value that's created through our civic engagement. So if we are going to engage with the political landscape in the United States, have we been able to improve governance? Have we been able to improve the quality of discourse? Have we been able to influence policy? This is our soft power as a diaspora. So this may be, again, measured in terms of government positions held. By the way, here this is local, state, ministerial, and bureaucratic positions, right? I thought there was a very good observation made about military, right? So here you see, I was actually doing a checklist that all the comments around impact that were made this morning, did I cover them? And I think I got them, most of them, right? We have military, we have the diplomatic corps, government organizations, participation in the bureaucracy. So these are the components and the metrics that I think that we can create as Indiaspora, a thought leadership around, but this is going to need a lot of work, right? So what's next here is that we need to actually quantify, and I won't want to take you through the boring but very rigorous process of construct validity and reliability and empirical validation and so on. All that needs to follow. And by the way, I'm happy to help in that process because we've done this, we do this for a living. Yes? Spirituality, yeah.
And that, let's not underestimate, is it working? Yes. Let's not underestimate that, because a lot of diaspora, I mean outside the diaspora, they do look at us for yoga, for meditation. You go to the, the wellness center. I was looking at the plane when I'm coming, and the top 5 centers is the Boon's, Shri Shri's Boon Spirituality Center. So I was very blown away that United flight had that, big blow up on that. So let's not underestimate that, because that's a huge, huge element.
No, that's a great point. I had one epic, you made it into many epics. So we'll add spirituality, as the 5th. But that is actually very well said. Broadly speaking, I was thinking about it within the intellectual realm, but this is very distinct. And by the way, there we also have to prevent cultural appropriation. What yoga has become around here, and the patterns of Ayurveda are held by Western entities and so on. But yes, I think that is, and one can sort of also think about, there isn't a very explicit dimension here that's talking about culture and cultural heritage and the wisdom that we have to impart. But yes, I think spirituality should be added as a component. So, by the way, these are the sorts of conversations we need to have. By no means have I any pride of ownership about all this. This is over, and I am also jet lagged. I came from Thailand yesterday. But it's just meant to be a thought starter. It's meant to be sort of a conversation saying, how do we actually think about this in a more concrete way? So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that what I would hope, and this is sort of collage or cults in that spirit, that we have an annual index that measures, and actually also has a diagnostic and a prescriptive element to it, saying we are weaker on this dimension versus that dimension, that we have made more progress on the economic front, but maybe on the philanthropic front. So it gives you a dashboard to kind of start thinking about, and I think that you have an opportunity to actually create this, and this can be done with a couple of interns and people who start to think about how we put the data together and start at least to build an MVP, start somewhere. It's not going to be precise, but it's something to start with. Initially, it can be conceptual. Later, it can be empirical. Finally, it can be institutionalized. So that's the thought I had to share with you. Yeah.
Professor? Is it on? Okay. Professor Sawhney, I think this is fantastic, by the way. My only build to what you offered was, we are at 10 years today. If we take a look at another 10 years from now, what is our aspirational scorecard against the frame that you just pulled together?
Right. I think that if we get sufficient clarity around the metrics, then that aspiration can be quantified, right? And I think that they've done this implicitly in the past, saying 1% of Congress, right? But, we can say 10 million lives impacted through philanthropy, so excellent idea, but we can't quantify what we don't know how to measure. So first we have to decide what we are going to measure, what that dashboard looks like, but absolutely, then there's nothing like a quantifiable aspirational vision, right? Because otherwise it becomes abstract. How do we know we succeeded? How do we even define progress and success? Yeah.
Mohan, thank you for your homework assignment. When I applied for this job, I was not told that it included re-enrolling back in business school. But no, this is a great idea. I think it is something worth taking forward, and we'll need your guidance, and we'll also need a couple of interns. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But thanks a lot. Thank you so much for